Have you ever wondered what would destroy you faster? A direct blow or a whisper that feels as light as the wind? We're always taught to watch out for visible wounds for obvious attacks. But sometimes, what quietly tears you apart isn't a punch. It's the soft, toxic whispers that come again and again, sweet on the surface, but laced with poison underneath. There are wounds that leave no scars. There are chains that no one can see. And sometimes you're the one tightening them around your own neck, because somewhere deep inside, you've come to believe unconsciously that you deserve it. Covert abuse is a silent game of the mind. It doesn't need to shout in your face. It doesn't need to raise a fist. It just needs to be there every day, slipping into the way someone speaks to you, the way they frown, the way they twist a story, until you no longer know what's real and what's not. The scariest part? It's when you don't even realize you're being abused. You tell yourself you're just too sensitive, too confused, or too fragile. A man once shared that he could endure physical pain, but what broke him was the slow manipulation from his partner over the years, making him question his own memory. So, how can you tell if you're trapped in a form of abuse that leaves no bruises? The signs aren't complicated, but they're always hiding behind a mask of sweetness and logic. And if you still think abuse is only about punches and yelling, maybe it's time to take a closer look at what's really happening around you. Because sometimes it's the invisible things that are the most dangerous. But what exactly is covert abuse, and how can it control you without you even realizing it? Covert abuse is a hidden form of abuse. It operates in silence with subtlety and is incredibly hard to recognize. While overt abuse usually leaves clear marks on the body, covert abuse leaves deep invisible wounds in the mind, the kind of cracks you carry in silence, constantly doubting yourself. Covert abuse doesn't come from punches. It comes from phrases like, "You're just too sensitive," "I'm only doing this for your own good," or "You're overthinking it." It comes from small, seemingly harmless actions repeated over and over with quiet precision, until you begin to doubt your own feelings, your own memory, and your own worth. Unlike physical abuse, which is easier to spot and easier to call out, covert abuse often hides behind gestures of care, concern, or what society sometimes quietly accepts as love. People might say, "They just worry about you," or "They're only trying to protect you." But in reality, covert abuse slowly strips away your inner freedom, making you feel smaller, unsure of yourself, and more dependent on the abuser. For example, a husband might constantly remind his wife what she should wear, what she should eat, or who she should spend time with, always claiming it's because he loves her. Or a boss who keeps telling an employee to push harder while quietly dismissing every success they achieve. These actions don't cause bruises. They don't make a scene. But over time, they quietly distort how the victim sees themselves. Covert abuse can happen not just in families, but also at work, among friends, and in social circles. That's what makes it so dangerous. It can happen even when you think you're being loved. So how can you spot covert abuse? What are the signs that you might already be caught in this silent mental game? Take just 3 seconds to hit the subscribe button so you won't miss the upcoming videos. Sign 1. You're always too sensitive. One of the most subtle signs of covert abuse is when your feelings are constantly made to seem suspicious or invalid. When you're sad, they tell you, "You're too sensitive." When you're hurt, they say, "You're overthinking." When you speak up, they just smile and brush it off. You're blowing things out of proportion. Over time, these little comments plant a dangerous seed in your mind. The habit of doubting your own feelings. You start to believe you really are too sensitive. You convince yourself you need to control your emotions better, that you should stay quiet so you won't become a burden to the people around you. What makes this worse is that society often supports this narrative. Phrases like "women are just too emotional," "men don't pay attention to that stuff," or "kids don't know what they're talking about," get tossed around every day, quietly reinforcing the belief that your feelings don't matter, that they can't be trusted. Picture this: a wife tells her husband she feels lonely. He responds, "You always make things more complicated than they are. There's nothing to feel lonely about." After enough of these moments, she learns to stay silent, not because she's healed, but because she's buried her feelings so deep, she no longer gives them a voice. This doesn't just happen at home. In healthcare, when women complain about pain, doctors often dismiss them as overly sensitive, causing serious conditions to go overlooked. In the workplace, those in weaker positions are often labeled too emotional when they speak up about injustice. When your feelings are repeatedly dismissed, you slowly lose the ability to trust yourself, and that's the perfect breeding ground where covert abuse takes root. But if your emotions can be this easily dismissed, what else can be twisted? Can you even trust your own memory? Sign 2. They always find a way to flip the story. If dismissing your feelings is the first step, flipping the story is the sharpest weapon in covert abuse. This is when the abuser turns you, the victim, into the one at fault. They twist reality, bend the facts, and slowly make you believe that you're the problem. You tell them they've hurt you. They say, "You're attacking me," or "You're just making things up." You try to recall what really happened, and they say, "You're remembering it wrong." You feel pain, and they smirk. That's not what actually happened. This is gaslighting, the psychological tactic of manipulating your memory and perception, and it's the heart of this mental game. When you've been gaslighted for long enough, you start to question your own memories. It's a dangerous trap. The harder you try to prove you're right, the deeper you sink into their carefully crafted maze. For example, during an argument, a husband might genuinely say something hurtful, but with just a few calm words later like, "I never said that," or "You're remembering wrong." He can make his wife doubt her own mind. Eventually, she'll stop speaking up, not because she's convinced, but because she no longer trusts her own memory. This kind of manipulation isn't limited to families. In the business world, companies sometimes gaslight customers by shifting blame, saying things like, "The product isn't defective. You used it wrong," even when the flaw is clearly in the design. It's a more subtle form of gaslighting in professional settings, but the harm is just as real. Of course, not every disagreement or difference in memory is gaslighting. People naturally remember things differently sometimes. So, how can you tell the difference between honest confusion and calculated manipulation? The answer lies in how they slowly disconnect you from reality, and you'll see that through the next signs. Sign 3, subtle isolation. After making you question your feelings and memories, a covert abuser will quietly begin to isolate you, but not through force or strict orders. They do it through gentle suggestions, seemingly sincere concerns, and carefully worded comments. You won't even realize it's happening, but slowly, you'll find yourself drifting away from the people who truly care about you. They'll say things like, "Your friends don't really understand you," like I do, or "Your family just confuses you," or "You should keep your distance from her," "I don't think she's really looking out for you." At first, it feels like they're just trying to protect you, but over time, you notice you're hanging out less, sharing less, and seeing less of the people who might actually help you see the truth. This kind of subtle isolation doesn't just happen in families. In schools, some teachers divide students into favorites and untrustworthy groups, quietly turning classmates against each other. In that kind of environment, the isolated students slowly lose their ability to resist or to seek help. Sign 4. Fake compliments. They don't praise you to make you feel more confident. They praise you to make you easier to control. They'll say things like, "No one takes care of me like you do," or "You're amazing because you always listen to me. You're not like the others." On the surface, these words seem harmless, but in reality, they're setting a trap. You begin to believe your worth is tied to pleasing them, and you start working to maintain that approval at any cost. In organizations, managers sometimes manipulate employees with conditional praise. I really value you because you always work overtime without complaining. Unlike others, they compliment you not to genuinely appreciate you, but to make you more compliant. When you start tying your self-worth to these kinds of compliments, you've unknowingly handed them the key to your emotional control. Subtle isolation and fake compliments are two sides of the same game, separating you from those who truly support you and binding you more tightly to those who are quietly manipulating you. But if they can strip you of your connections, can they also control your emotions through nothing more than silence? And what happens when silence itself becomes a weapon? Sign 5. Emotional withdrawal and the silent script. One of the quietest yet sharpest weapons of a covert abuser is intentional emotional withdrawal. They suddenly go cold. They go silent. They cut you off completely as a form of invisible punishment. You text them and they don't reply. You try to make peace and they ignore you. You apologize, but they stay silent. In that silence, you have no idea what you did wrong, but you find yourself willing to do anything just to win back their attention. And you don't even realize you're already under their control. This is a dangerous psychological trap. The abuser doesn't need to yell. They don't need to use force. All they need to do is withdraw, and you'll punish yourself with loneliness, with guilt. You slowly learn to follow their rules just to avoid that terrifying emotional void. This tactic isn't limited to families. In politics, some leaders deliberately disappear from the media, staying silent during crises to control public perception. The crowd, left in confusion, becomes easier to manipulate when the narrative finally returns on the abuser's terms. Sign 6. The good guy versus bad guy narrative. In their version of the story, they're always the hero, the one who sacrifices the misunderstood victim. You, in their eyes, are the troublemaker, the ungrateful one, maybe even the toxic one. They tell this story to you, to your family, to your friends, until you start to wonder, maybe I really am the problem. For example, a husband might tell friends, I've done everything for her, but she's never satisfied. What he doesn't mention are the times he used ends to control her. He leaves out the moments he flipped the truth. He carefully tells only the parts that make him look like the one who's suffering. Of course, not everyone who paints themselves as the victim is intentionally manipulating. Sometimes people unconsciously put themselves in the good guy role to protect themselves from emotional pain. But when this pattern repeats with quiet control and careful distortion, you need to pay attention. So why is covert abuse able to creep so easily into relationships and go unnoticed? Is society unknowingly helping these forms of abuse survive? Covert abuse often goes unnoticed, not because it's harmless, but because society has unconsciously built a system that allows it to hide safely within our relationships. When you suffer physical abuse, the wounds are visible. Everyone can see them. But when you're being subtly manipulated, your emotions aren't trusted. And that's the biggest blind spot. Society tends to believe what can be measured, but it often dismisses the pain that can't be seen. In many cultures, especially in places where gender stereotypes still run deep, women are often labeled as weak, overly emotional, or too sensitive. These labels create a blind zone where women's feelings and experiences are easily dismissed. When a woman speaks up, people often ask, "Are you sure?" or "Maybe you're exaggerating," or "Could you have misunderstood him?" And it's not just women. Young people, immigrants, and those in vulnerable positions within organizations are often seen as too inexperienced or too fragile to be taken seriously. When they say they're being covertly abused, the common response is, "You're probably just too sensitive." On top of that, our systems like the legal healthcare and educational frameworks still lack clear guidelines for recognizing covert abuse. The police won't file a report because he gave me the silent treatment. The court won't step in because she complimented me at the wrong time. These behaviors fall into a gray area that society isn't quite ready to name. That's why covert abuse often survives as a kind of hidden culture in families, companies, and even religious institutions where silence and obedience are still praised as virtues. What's even more heartbreaking is that sometimes the victims themselves unknowingly enable covert abuse. They convince themselves they should endure a little try to get along or forgive the small things. Society loves to celebrate people who sacrifice, but it rarely teaches us how to tell the difference between healthy patience and quiet self-destruction. Some researchers believe that modern social awareness has helped us recognize covert abuse more clearly. And it's true, terms like gaslighting are now widely known. But in reality, covert abuse continues to hide within relationships that seem normal from the outside. The problem isn't just a lack of knowledge, it's the social structures that quietly accept this behavior as part of what love, marriage, or work is supposed to be. But if covert abuse is so deeply tolerated by society, can we really escape it? And how do we find our true selves after living so long in a reality that's been distorted? Covert abuse isn't made up of punches you can measure or angry words you can record. It hides in 6 familiar but hard-to-spot signs. Your feelings being labeled as too sensitive. Your memories being flipped against you. Your relationships being subtly isolated. Compliments with hidden agendas, emotional withdrawal. As a quiet form of punishment, and the good guy versus bad guy narrative that slowly makes you believe you're the problem. What covert abuse steals from you isn't just your emotions or your memories, it's your right to trust yourself. So, how do you break free? The first step isn't necessarily to leave the relationship, it's to see the truth. You need to ask yourself, do my feelings matter? Are my memories worth trusting? When you start listening to your own intuition, you begin to loosen the invisible chains that the abuser has wrapped around you. Test your feelings with someone you trust, someone outside the abuser's influence. Sometimes all it takes is for one person to say, I would feel hurt too if I were you, and suddenly you start to see your reality more clearly. Finding a safe space is key. It could be a support group, a conversation with a counselor, or simply relationships where you are heard without judgment. In those spaces, you'll slowly relearn how to feel, how to remember, and most importantly, how to trust yourself again. Remember, covert abuse doesn't end in a single day, but you can walk away from it step by step, starting with awareness. Because the most dangerous thing isn't being lied to by someone else, it's when you start hypnotizing yourself with the words they left behind. If you found this video helpful, hit like and subscribe so you won't miss the upcoming videos, and don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below.